Everyone, so glad to have you. My name is Cyndy McDonald. I want to welcome you after the hiatus that I've had in the Friday forums. I've been gone all the month of May and the month of June. Many of you know the reason I was gone was because we were expecting a grandchild, and baby Alira McDonald was born day after her due date on May 30th. So we're so glad she's here, and I just want to thank all of you for making this hiatus so productive, and it was just so relaxing to know that everybody was in good shape and that you would be back when we come back, and here we are. And so as you're joining us today, I want you to put in your name and your location. I have with me today Carmen Gallegos. She is my producer. She keeps us on track. So she will be watching your questions and comments. And I really encourage you to have a conversation. We're here to facilitate this conversation and to build that community. And having just come back from several conferences, I really felt that. And it was so great to meet so many of you and see many of you in person. And today we have my good friend, colleague, and expert, Jed Applerouth. Jed is the founder and president of Applerouth Tutoring Services. It's a national test prep and academic service provider. He's a nationally certified counselor. And Jed, I think a lot of people don't realize this about you, that's that hat that you wear, with a master's degree in professional counseling and a PhD in educational psychology. I know he's researched many, many years testing. I guess it's over 2 decades, and has shown that and presented those findings at national conferences. He's published in several peer-reviewed journals. He's often, and one of his focus is on motivation, and a pedagogy has informed his instructional style of the Applerouth team tutors. Also, you may not know, he's a trained landscape artist, and I've seen some of his artwork, and likes to play, I can't even say this.
Djembe is a drum. I bang on my drum.
Oh, your drum. All right, say what it is, though.
Oh, djembe.
Djembe.
Yeah,
Okay.
DJ is like djembe. Just yeah.
And a guitar, and for his little ones who are at home. So, Jed, I'm glad to have you here. As everybody's coming in, you can see that we've got people from just all over.
Oh,
And we're so
Switzerland and LA and Florida. Yeah, very cool.
So it's and this is such a topic, and it is something that is evolving all the time.
Yeah.
Every week it seems like we're getting news that different colleges are reinstating testing, or like I was reading yesterday, the other day, that University of Chicago has a new admissions plan, early summer. If you did a summer program, you can apply to University of Chicago. And there's all these different things. So much of this then contributes to the anxiety
Right.
that our students and our youth experience. Um, so tell us a little bit more about yourself and how you got into this area.
Yeah. This field, it was an interesting path. It wasn't ever my intention to go here, like when I was, in college, but life happens and you shift and pivot. I studying entrepreneurial management, like a Wharton, and I was pre-business, and I taught AmeriCorps for a year out in New Mexico. I taught fifth grade, and it was a bunch of great kids, and it was community service, and I loved that year of my life. And then after AmeriCorps, I came back and I spent 2 years at McKinsey consulting company, helping companies with all kind of projects. I was an analyst, and when that wrapped up, I actually did this 10-day intensive therapeutic retreat at this thing called the Star Foundation that both my parents had went to in the early 90s. And it was life-changing. It was this really powerful 10-day experience. When I came back from that, I decided I didn't want to be anywhere near the corporate world. I wanted to try something very different. And that's when I said, I'm going to be a painter and be an artist. And I started painting. And that lasted for about 6 months of just painting. And I realized I need some more money and health insurance and everything else. So I went back and started doing a little bit of tutoring on the side. And it was, honestly, I was going to paint all day and then do this little bit of tutoring in the evenings, maybe the weekends. But after a couple of years, I started getting busy and full. And then I had to hire people to keep up with demand, and then I, doing groups, then got an office, and that was 2001 when I started. And after several years, this thing was a real business, and so that was kind of to my surprise. I still painting, but much more tutoring. That's I was working with a student of mine, and it really got me thinking that I need more skills. I think it was one of my first students, in 2002. It was an academic kid I was working with, and he was getting C's at the high school I went to, and they sent me to, can you help this kid doing academic support and those kind of things. But he began to disclose all these other things in his life that were happening with him that were not academically based. He was getting C's. His parents were going through a divorce. He also was telling me he was putting out cigarettes on his arm, and I'm like, well, that hurts. And why are you doing that? And he had, smoking pot and other things. I'm like, okay. And I'm here to help him with his grades, but he's coming with all this other content. And I felt a little bit ill-equipped. Like, what do I tell this kid? And I was in my mid-20s at the time. And so, you know what? I need some more skills. And I decided to go back and get a master's in counseling. And so I spent 3 years. Part of that, I was at Emory for a year doing counseling with undergrads. And when I finished that, I'm like, you know what? I'm on a roll. I could get a PhD in eds and like cognitive psychology, or just But I said, why don't I pivot towards educational psychology, towards ed psych, which is really still psychology, but also psychology of learning, what I was doing with my work. And that took me 7 years to finish that. But I finally wrapped it up. So it was 10 years at Georgia State, and I finally got my degrees wrapped up. But all the while, like, I think the work I was doing on, like, I did a class in my first year of counseling on motivation, and that really affected me. And then later I did classes on like memory and cognition and how the brain works and some neuroscience stuff. And it really started to shift, like the way kids talk to themselves, has obviously impacts on your mental health, but also huge impacts on your performance academically and your performance on anything high stakes testing. I began to get exposed to test anxiety. And I realized, oh, wait a minute, I've taken classes in anxiety reduction and mitigation, the same exact approaches and strategies I was learning with my counseling classes. I can help some of these kids, doing cognitive rehearsal, looking at self-talk. And I got really interested in self-talk. That's something like the messages are telling you, your inner dialogue as a means of sustaining anxiety or reducing anxiety. And reading Dan Siegel and hearing him lecture and reading his books, talking about, how do you learn how to self-regulate feelings, emotions? How do I, and which is honestly, it's so important for academics and anything high stakes, but also just generally. How do I manage my arousal when I'm going to the dentist? I'm concerned about that, or I have something coming up, I have a big paper coming up, or I'm applying for an internship, or I have an interview, things that affect kids real time. And everyone, we all have some arousal, some stress, and some stress is actually very healthy and adaptive, and it's great. If you have no stress in your life, you're going to be in trouble. Like, we need some level of stress, but the whole thing of when, eustress becomes distress and we have too much of it and then we get overwhelmed, how do I find that line? How do I help kids learn how to understand themselves, understand their peak of when stress is good and healthy and adaptive and when it becomes negative and destructive. And not, I never want to pathologize all stress, because some stress is really, really good. And even a little bit of worry is okay. A tiny bit of concern about this matters. Well, yeah, and that can affect your behaviors. But it's just when there's so much concern and so much forward negative thinking about what might happen, and that begins to, impair your ability to prepare or carry out tasks. And that's when it becomes, pathological or negative. That's when it becomes more of a condition than just this is, we have a little bit of worry, some repetitive thoughts and anxiety. Totally okay. And, living with someone, like my wife told me last night, she had a call from someone, and for an hour and a half between 3 and 4:30, she was thinking about things and going over it, and her mind was, and that's what we do. We're humans, and we work through things. So having a little bit of stress, some anxiety, okay. It's just when it becomes more broad, more general, or it really impairs functioning. That's when we have to talk about how do we help a student, give them more skills. Worst case scenario, we treat it with medication or molecules. But ideally, you find a way to manage it internally without needing, pharmaceuticals, which I have students I work with who take them. Some of them need them to function. But in a perfect world, you learn techniques and skills and other things before you have to, reach for the Ativan or the medication, anti-anxiety meds and so forth.
Oh, so You gave us all sorts of things within that. So I have a whole bunch of questions already for you. First of all, can you tell us a little bit more about Dan Siegel? I'm sure I'm not the only one that's not quite as informed about who that is, the studies, the
Yeah, Dan's work. He is always he's working with patients directly, but looking at the way the brain works, understanding the brain. And one of the foundational books I have it's on my shelf in the library downstairs. I could grab it, but talking about teaching people a little bit of neuroscience as a means of helping them understand what's actually happening, what the cascade of hormones and hormonal modulators that are taking place when you start getting into the fear-based center, like when the amygdala gets really active and you're sensing a threat and there's something that might hurt me, and then your body kicks into higher gear, and it's you have these stress responders. We know about cortisol and catecholamine. It ramps up a lot of things in the body. Dilates our pupils, changes our breathing, our skin tension, moves energy away from our stomach, towards our large muscles ready to run. The fight or flight, classic thing, or fight, flight. Some say freeze, fold, one of the four Fs, and then how that affects cognition and thinking. And so when you're in this place, there's less frontal lobe activation. You're doing less of this, the front cortical processing, and you're back in this, survival mode. And that really negatively impairs working memory. We know that. You can't access things that you had studied or things you just read, because that's, a little bit of cortisol is great for focus. A little bit of norepinephrine is great for, attention, but then too much of it. And this is just, general broad. Dan Siegel talks about this. Also, Richard Sapolsky talks a lot about the stress response. He's fabulous. He wrote like Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers, or The Primates Memoir. He's studied baboons in the Serengeti, other things forever. And he talks about how the stress hormones affect both primates and humans. But Dan Siegel talks about, I remember, like mindfulness, and that he was talking about, if you understand what's happening, that you're in the rear part of the brain, you're kind of going the forward, the backward, and the activation is more behind, and then you want to bring it back to the frontal lobes. And how do I get back there? And part of it is understanding like you're releasing something. There's a chemical that calms down the activation of the amygdala. It's GABA, GABA, like gamma aminobutyric acid, and GABA helps reduce the activation level and reduce the stress response. So then, the amygdala stops communicating with the adrenals, releasing less cortisol, less adrenaline. And if I can get in the frontal lobe and like kind of calming down the amygdala and like centering yourself, taking breaths, and you start sending GABA, back, and then that begins to relax the amygdala. So you're not in this crazy fear spiral. And learning how to bring that about, learning how to just be mindful of this game that's happening, the front and back, of the gas pedal and the brake pedal. And oh wow, I'm really active, things are happening. I may feel it in my pulse, in my breathing rate, and I'm sweating, I'm feeling my stomach's feeling off, like, oh gosh, gotcha. I'm in a cascade of hormones caused by the amygdala and the cortisol, adrenaline. So if I can get back to the front, squeeze out a little bit of GABA, calm down the amygdala, do some breathing, put my hand on my chest, do some things to calm myself down. And touch is always very soothing. And when people are afraid, they often put their hand on their chest or hand, and that's a very instinctive thing. And I have a 18-month-old, or actually no, Theo's 20, sorry, 20-month-old little boy, a 4-year-old little girl. And it's the same thing. When they get stressed, when they get upset, I come and I soothe them. It's physical. And there's touch and there's calming. And like I stroke their backs if they're crying, if they're upset. And that stroking, it affects these things called the afferent nerves, which send signal back. And that calms them down when they're all activated and upset. The same thing with other animals, other primates, even mice. When a rat pup gets distressed or upset, the mom comes and licks it and grooms it, and the level of cortisol in the mouse or rat decreases. And so human touch is one of the major ways that we calm ourselves. So my thing is like when I'm stressed, I calm myself down. There's also a really great method called havening, Havening. I have a friend who's studied this stuff, and it's honestly, it's just kind of soothing, calming touches on your hand, even like on your face, and like doing things like this. So when you're stressed, learning how to use your own body's systems for down-regulating stress, versus, and we also have all the evidence in the world when someone gets stressed or shocked or whatever it is, and they have someone's hand to hold, the level of activation and arousal and stress decreases. If there's a hand to hold, someone to just human contact down-regulates stress. Same thing with petting a dog. Same thing with petting a cat. And we use our animals to stay healthy. People with animals live a little bit longer because of what they make. Well, dogs, they make you walk more and get you off your tush. But also we get to lower our stress levels and calm down our blood pressure and we get in this interesting synchrony with other animals. Like if they're relaxed and calm, we start getting into the same waves as them in terms of temperature and pressure and pulse. We get in this harmony with people, which Cyndy, you were saying, you talk a little bit more slowly, I talk a little more quickly, but we get together and start to focus on each other, and we start to find a synchrony, like a wave pattern that's more in alignment. So other humans help keep us sane. Other humans help, downregulate anxiety. I was having a talk this morning, and last night I heard a podcast with Sherry Turkle, who's incredible, MIT professor, researcher. And I first came across her as maybe 2014 or so. She did a book, Alone Together, and talking about, and she's written like they're getting back to conversation, all these things about technology. And I was listening to her talking about there's a new technology with AI, which is a big thing coming. And these like replicant, there are these things where people are talking to bots and people are talking to, and it's voice based. And whenever something is voice based, you tend to anthropomorphize and associate them with being human. But people who want, like this thing helps calm me down. It's an AI, it's an algorithm. But ultimately, like using that and talking about some of the good things about that and the bad things about that. If we're learning to outsource some of our empathic needs, not to humans and the message of humans, but let me get what I need from an app. Let me have this app give me some kind of comfort or validation or whatever it is, versus going to a friend or a loved one. And there are pros and cons of outsourcing to our AI companions. But Sherry is someone always thinking about how these things affect us, our mental health. There's a great book, Jean Twenge, Twenge. She wrote about the iPhone generation called iGen, and looking at how all of our devices are contributing, she thinks, to higher anxiety. How the advent of the smartphone and levels of teen anxiety began to go hand in hand. And I think there's something to that. And I think we're gaining stuff. Phones are incredible, they're amazing, and they're powerful tools. But when our entire lives are mediated by these screens, something is lost. When I send my friend a snap versus going and having a conversation, I lose the voice, the prosody, the inflection. And there's research that the self-calming that it comes with the calming effect of communication with others, the voice is really required more than the text itself on the screen. You're not going to get, if someone sends you a supportive message, does not have the same emotional calming effect as hearing it and hearing the inflection and the calming and the breathing pattern. We get so much more from the communication when it's packaged with everything, just not the text alone. Right. So humans are huge. Friendship, connection. I work with one of my students right now. She's very isolating, as her temperament, personality. And I give her homework every week, and part of it is executive functioning coaching, for her classes, her academics over the summer school. But also I need you to go out and, have at least one social interaction over the course of the week. Find someone to talk to, find someone to connect with. Because we can definitely get into a place where we are nervous and anxious. And then our instinct sometimes is to narrow down and whittle down and versus reaching out. And I always want to encourage people to reach outward versus shutting things down when stresses get higher. Because that human connections, again, humans keep you sane. And if you want to go crazy, go isolate yourself and cut off human contact. And that's how you go crazy. Humans keep us centered and grounded, and they're important for our mental health. And Twenge's research was anything that's human contact, belonging to a group or a team, a religious organization in person, anything in person helps us lower stress and increase happiness. And so that's one of the basic things. Like we're just becoming worse mammals in this digital age. We're spending less time connecting, listening, learning. We're getting more, the more cyber engagement. It's a connection, but it's a pretty weak connection. And versus like having a few real friends and good friends you can lean on and talk to, versus amping things up with, texting and things like that. So I'm a big proponent of in-person friendships, in-person connection. I know there's less of that with this generation. And they used to be like on average, they're down like 6 hours of human contact versus my Gen X. we spend more times at parties, more time with friends. We had more friends. Now there's a lot more interaction online, but then there's other concerns about performing a self online, which
Mhm.
is anxiety inducing versus hanging out with friends and you tell a joke and it doesn't land, like you can learn from it versus now I'm on a big group chat and I say something and there's a different level of anxiety or shame that I say the wrong thing, that I package it the wrong way, and people trying to perform. And when you're performing and you're worried about being, that's stress inducing versus with friends, there's not this pressure to perform. You can be yourself. So any kind of authentic engagement, any kind of, I'm a huge fan of having kids journal, which is so
Mhm.
old school. But I'm not looking for any external validation. I'm learning how to validate myself. And
Right.
that makes you less fragile, less vulnerable, versus I need other people out there to validate me or give me thumbs up or likes or heart emojis or fire or whatever. Versus no, I know how to help myself, support myself, love myself. Because ultimately, it's you and the world, and you have your friends to help you. But if your internal relationship is not healthy, if your inner monologue and that's not healthy, it doesn't matter how many friends you have externally, you're not going to be at peace. And so really investing in time, I love putting the phones down. I love time in nature. And to me, nature is so healing. And all this evidence, when you spend time in nature, even looking at nature, hearing the sounds of nature, it does calm down our systems. And so we are nature deficient. It's also one of the reasons we're all going to be myopic. We're looking at our screens versus looking at the wide expanses of looking outside and looking at trees and looking at long horizons. So we need time outside for our vision, for one, but also our mental health. And so a lot of these things, it's, interesting being a dad, and I have very small children, but I've been working with kids now for, a quarter century and trying to help them engage with the world in a very positive way. And, they have some anxieties or they're worried about performance, but also looking at the balance of their lives and the happiness and looking at academics as one piece, or if your first job is this, your interviews, your internships, it's a small part of it. But globally, how are you doing as a human being? How is your diet? How is your exercise? How well are you sleeping? Your social life, your intimacy, like connections, how are you doing intellectually? Like looking at the whole package versus this narrow thing of I have to perform this self for someone who's going to evaluate me later on versus like really authentic engagement. And even I gave a talk about grade inflation that, in Connecticut recently, and we gave a talk a few days ago online. And as I'm doing discovery, as I'm going through my high school career, am I expanding and learning and growing and exploring, or am I just trying to narrow, and present to you a self you might let into your college? And so again, this performance thing, I'm trying to perform a self, a life, versus am I really engaging authentically? Am I taking risks that are appropriate? Am I exploring? Am I being willing to make mistakes and screw up versus I'm trying to get it right? And for an audience or for, someone to validate me. And the authentic life, the one where you're really listening to yourself, taking care of yourself, trusting yourself is obviously a much better life than one that's, I need someone else to validate me. Because and then there are kids who get crushed. They didn't get into a school. They wanted to get, this group of admissions officers didn't validate me, and therefore my self-esteem, my self-concept is hurt. Versus if I really know who I am, and I really don't need, I'd love to get into the school. That'd be really fun. But my sense of self isn't pegged or hinged on that outcome. But I know who I am, and I'm going to end up being okay if I go to this school or this school or this school. It's not you guys make or break me.
Right.
And so that comes from building an authentic self, having relationships, and not looking externally for everyone for that validation.
Right. So that leads me to a couple of things. So it sounds like, the research is starting to show that. And we know as counselors and advisors, we've seen the increase in anxiety of teens. And
Yeah.
there's a lot of data about that. What does the current data say? What is your awareness or understanding of, are teens more stressed? You mentioned the
Yeah.
research that shows because of digital technology, social media. Kind of where are we at with that?
We are more stressed. And it's interesting in terms of it's multifactorial. It's not one thing in terms of why there's more stress. And at one level, looking at engagement on the positive side, there are people who are getting more willing to do help-seeking behaviors. the engagement, like I have friends who are, counselors and psychologists on college campuses, and their dance cards are full. They're busier than they've ever been in history, and colleges across the country are trying to ramp up their their staff and their resources because more kids, there's less of a stigma. And you hear, there's, I forget, Michael Phelps, other of the tennis stars coming forward and saying, I have anxiety or I have depression or and I need
Oh,
help. As
wow.
it's becoming more normalized
Mhm.
that the idea that even people we admire and we want to be like them, they also have anxiety. They also have stress. They also have depression. And there's much less of a stigma. And it, began to there were some cracks, in the wall in the 80s, 90s. Some folks came out and like, my life isn't perfect, but now it's everyone's, yeah, my life's not perfect. And there are times that's hard. So I think there's less of a stigma, there's more use. But on the downside, there's also more suicidal attempts and successes. And that's a real thing. I've had one of my students, one of her best friends, killed themselves during the pandemic. Another dear friend of mine, his daughter was going through a hard time. It was suicidal ideation. And I've never seen my friend so stressed out in his life when your little girl tells you, she's thinking about taking her life. And some of this is that the pandemic did stir up and increase isolation and anxiety and depression, and it would deprive people of their social milieu and their all the things that kept them healthy. A lot of kids lost it, and some of them cracked under that, just the absence of these supporting structures. I can't go and be part of the dance squad, and I can't go and do stuff, and I can't engage. And suddenly, without all my networks and support, people were isolating. They're online more, and some of them began to crack. They began to get less healthy mentally because they couldn't have that grounding of their peers and their friends, and also exercise. Whenever people are, nervous or depressed or anxious or have addiction, exercise, cardiovascular fitness, working, it helps everything with serotonin and dopamine and, all the good stuff, oxytocin. We need, to move our bodies, to move the pumps, to push the lymph, get everything moving, to get rid of waste products. So physical activity also really does help with anxiety. But your question is like, what's going on? Like, yeah, net rates of anxiety are up, rates of depression are up, suicidal ideation attempts are up. So we know at the high school level, at the college level for sure. And the various factors. I am a firm believer that excessive technology use is tied to some of that increase in anxiety, that co-rumination with your peers and things get stressed out more. There's more performance anxiety. That's all real. And also other stressors, we're in a time, the adults are anxious too. There are things that are happening. There's nature, looking at climate change, looking at what's coming. I am both delighted and excited and a bit scared of AI. And I track it pretty closely. I read about it. I work with it. I read newsletters and Substacks, and because like I have small children and I think about what their lives are going to be like. So there's the climate. There's we are definitely more polarized politically. Where the discourse at the advent of the internet is less civil. There's a lot more in your face conflict, aggressive conflict. That's cyberbullying. That's all real too. People being mean and cruel. I've seen it. Other friends and their kids are saying things, or they're removing friends from group chats and saying nasty things. Like, wow, this new way of being mean to each other is really amplifies social pressure and performance pressure. I feel like the college admissions process is harder, is more stressful. More kids applying to these spots, looking at my friend was trying to get his daughter into Texas from Atlanta. They accept 8 out of 100 kids. And like the stress and anxiety, like him getting stressed out, like, dude, the odds are so like UNC Chapel Hill, the odds of getting in are 6% out of state. It's like these are tough numbers, which weren't the case when we were applying to college in the 90s. And so it is more selective. The schools that are selective are very selective. That's causing pressure. And like I gave a talk again Wednesday for tech out of state, getting into Georgia Tech. 76% of students coming from out of state don't have a single B on their transcript. Only 20. So like the idea of like me getting a B and then I can't go to tech. And that's not really a fantasy. And it's like mostly A's from Georgia, from out of state, it's even tougher. And so kids getting nervous and anxious and worked up about their grades, some of that is because of the how competitive it's gotten in that process. And then like how do I ramp that down? And then the pressure to take more academic load on. If everybody has A's, then I differentiate by having more APs, more IBs, but that means more time doing homework. And that means less time interacting socially or getting outside or playing or having a job or going on dates or other things. So I think we are in a bit of a spiral academically where there is more pressure, more stress, and people are just doing less of the things that ground them and make them feel good. So there is a big reset, and it'll be interesting when my kids are older. Right now, I'm in a place where I feel like I want to put as little pressure on them as possible because there's already so much pressure externally, and they may self-impose pressure. But if my kids are, my wife and I are both very strong students academically, and if our kids are different, are we going to be okay with that? Are we going to, if our kids are getting B's or maybe even C's, are we going to, lose our minds, or can I practice what I've been preaching for the past 20 years and, be positive, but also this is their lives, and my kids are not an ego extension of me. And sometimes we also know that our kids might not do as well as we did.
Mhm.
And that's like, the economics of this country have shifted. And it's not just social upward mobility. A lot of kids won't do as well or make as much as their parents. They won't have the same lifestyle. And a lot of parents are a little bit nuts trying to make sure they do everything in their power to get their kids into the right, elementary school, the right kindergarten, the right private school, the right college, and they're working hard. And some of that stress can be translated down to the kids. Some of the parental anxiety can go to the kids. So part of it is parents have to do their own work, make sure they're taking care of themselves if they really want to help their kids who may be nervous and anxious. And the way you're responding to any kind of failures, any setbacks, your response affects how the kids feel as well. If they show you a bad grade, then they become afraid to show you a bad grade, then that could ramp up anxiety for them versus a level of acceptance. I'm not really a tiger mom proponent. I'm more of the I don't know, more Rogerian, more positive regard than I'm going to put pressure, because I think the kids are going to have pressure. And if they don't, my pressure is not going to really change or internalize them. I don't want to use shame. I don't want to belittle, if my
Yeah,
kids might not be A students, and that's
right.
all right too. Um, so, that's also something too, making sure parents are taking care of themselves, their mental health, making sure that we're not ramping things up, that kids have outlets, that we're encouraging social interaction, that we're encouraging phone-free time. And then if a kid really has anxiety showing up, that we can help them get tools. We can help them get resources. Because some kids, some of the kids I work with, the anxiety is clinical. It presents and it's functionally impairing. Some of them, it's just there's less pleasure in life. School is less pleasurable. Can I find a way to downregulate anxiety? One of the things I often do with kids is look through their schedule and like, can I take things off the plate? Can I
Mhm.
make more space? Which is sometimes kids are overscheduled, which in and of itself is stressful. If there's not enough downtime or time to be bored or time to daydream or, time to not be just laser focused, and giving kids a little more space. Every time I've had kids drop a class or shift from an advanced to like their lives have just gotten better. I've never seen a student regret that. Yeah. And I do see that too. It's hard to pull back from being hyper concerned. And that really is our work. How do we teach our kids? Because honestly, I mean, in the new world, the whole thing is where is their solid ground, right? We're all trying to figure out how do we help our kids have a life that's going to be successful and they're going to be happy. They have like, marriage and children, all these things. And how much does the degree matter? How much do the grades matter? Versus, the kids, the adults who are together and like they don't have addictions, or the ones who they manage themselves well, they manage others well, they're able to manage teams well. And people are really good at team management. Like they've done a lot of inner work. And like there's gonna be a lot of team orientation and people who could, communicate with empathy and talk and connect and be creative and brainstorm. Like, I don't know. My sense is getting to 4.0, like maybe those skills are going to be less valuable in the future of what's coming with this new interactive collaborative so I don't know. I think parents ideally step back a little bit from their kids. And very often I've been doing this for hundreds of students for several decades. Very often when I'm listening with parents, I ask them to withdraw a little bit. I typically ask them to hover a little bit less,
Mhm.
give a little more space, allow setbacks. And when there are setbacks or failures or things, yeah, my thing as an executive function coach is curiosity, not shame or stigma or I'm disappointed, but it's like, okay, let's process what happened. And like typically kids succeed, they want to do well if they can.
Mhm.
And so very few kids want to screw up or fail. And And so part of it is, what resources they're using, how they're studying, when they're studying. And so it's more exploration, curiosity, reflection. So they learn after an outcome wasn't optimal. Let's process that. Let's go back and look at that more as a coach, kind of I'm going to hold space, versus let me get in there and tell you how to fix it, or also give you negative attention because you didn't get the outcome I liked. And so, because I have kids disappoint me constantly in terms of, we established a plan. And some of my students, it's every single week. I know I'm going to give them homework in three areas. They might
And they're
do
not
it
going
in
to do
one
it.
or in zero. And
Right.
it's, I have to, not with judgment or how could you, but okay, well, let's check in and process. And I think learning and practicing patience and understanding, like, you can't do it for them. You can scaffold and support. But the ultimate thing is we're going to let them go. Like our kids are 18 pretty soon.
Right.
And if the more control, the less I let them fail and learn from their failures, the more in some ways I'm crippling them and I'm diminishing, and I'm going to make their failures that much more expensive when I'm not there to catch them. And so swooping in, that's swooping. I get it. We love our kids. I see it for myself on the playground with my 4-year-olds. Like you want to get in there but sometimes you gotta hold back and it's hard to let them make their mistakes and let them, as long as they don't like fall and break an arm or something. But it's like, let me allow them to, get the skin knees and, make some mistakes socially. Let me not try to get in there and save. And sometimes our attempts to save even blow up right now. And I've seen that. One of my friends, his kid didn't understand some of the dynamics socially at summer camp and told on some kids, and then the other kids were really upset and rejected. So then my friend called the father of another, and then when the dads get involved with their, rising sophomores, and that
That's
blew up
never
even
good.
worse. It's
Right.
like trying to save your kids socially.
Yes.
At this point, like parents have to make space, talk to the kid, and talk to the kid when you're having a walk in nature with them. Not when they have a phone around, like to have a conversation, tell them areas in your life where you screwed up, things you regret when you were 12 and 15 and made mistakes, and create that empathic connection, by example, versus telling them what to do, or trying to intervene. Because at some point, you've got to stop getting in the middle and you have to disintermediate, let them be there socially, academically. And I think the impulse to go in there and call the teacher, like my parents didn't call teachers on my behalf. And I learned how, you learn how to negotiate, how to have skills,
Right.
how to deal with things. Because you want independent, autonomous kids.
Hmm.
And so every time a parent wants to save, and I work with kids, some of them are failing. And it's just like, I need the student to learn how to do this and navigate. And if it means withdrawing, if it means taking the F, or they sometimes hire me as the coach to help. And that's teaching the kid that having a resource is all right. Having a therapist is all right. But I want the parents doing as little saving directly as humanly possible.
So, Jed, will you talk about some of those techniques, the self-talk techniques,
Yeah,
those kinds of things? Um, it seems to me part of what we're talking about is helping students transition from that fixed mindset to that growth
yeah,
mindset. Because if I can't, and I hear this a lot with students, if I can't do it right the first time, I'm not going to do it. I don't like trying this game or this activity or something because I'm not perfect at it. Well, you can't be perfect at something until you work at it for a while. And but what are some of those
yeah,
specific techniques that we as counselors can teach our students?
absolutely. And the feedback, everyone loves, Carol Dweck and her work
Hmm.
at Stanford with mindset and,
Hmm.
ultimately talking about the growth orientation. And I can't, I can't do it yet. And things that imply there's a possibility for growth and reinforcing. And I have to be careful, like be careful of telling kids how smart they are. There are times I do tell my daughter how smart she is, but more reinforcing, reframing like the effort and the creativity and the work and how resourceful you were. So you're reinforcing process, not reinforcing you're brilliant, because that can make kids nervous. Am I always brilliant? Am I always, So Dweck is fabulous. Her stuff. Everyone should read Mindset. It's an easy book, a couple hours. And then there was Duckworth was great for. She had her
Hmm.
moment with grit and out of Penn. That was building on the work of Marty Seligman out of Penn. He was all about learned optimism. I think is brilliant too. He's a professor at Penn. almost took him when I was there, but I took his partner Rosin. But yeah, Marty Seligman, like learn optimism, helpful, learning how to reframe things. Because again, when things go wrong, it's not permanent or pervasive, or versus no, it's let me look at the context. In this instance, I didn't do as well as I wanted because of how much did I put in, what was the context. So not permanent, but it could be temporal, not pervasive, but in this narrow focused area, I made a mistake. We didn't do as well. Not globally, wow, I suck at math, or wow, globally, I'm not made for science. When you have a setback, and the reframing, like some of the with math, one of the reasons not enough girls go into STEM is they have this perception that I need to be perfect at math, and that there's no struggle in math. And if I'm struggling, it's an indication that I'm not made for this field. Versus boys, they struggle and they don't make it mean that. So there are different ways of interpreting the information. And even when boys and girls have very similar percentile scores on the NAEP tests or on math exams, like the females sometimes like, well, this is hard, therefore I shouldn't be in this field. Where guys like, no, I'm going to be an engineer. Onward. I may have gotten a C in the class. Who cares? Engineering forward. And so reframing that the struggle is part of math and it's healthy and it means you're on the growth path, not you're not made for the subject. So it's reframing when you're having some challenges, as challenges are good. I'm trying to think of other areas where how do you help kids reframe academic struggle? And the grit thing is good. That's really building on Carol Dweck's work. Um, so just not giving up in the middle of something, and learning how to get help, get support. Other techniques, in terms of anxiety reduction mitigation, like I love a researcher named Ethan Kross, wrote a very easy book called Chatter, and he's up in Michigan, the human studies and psychology. And I'm a huge believer in self-talk. I first was exposed to him with Albert Bandura's work out of Stanford also. Bandura was the father of this, of self-efficacy as a concept. That was his big thing. And our beliefs and our abilities, like our self-talk really does matter. But also, our belief in our abilities informs how we're going to perform as a major thing. So learning how to get more confident and, doing small steps of building competency and self-efficacy. And yeah, the Marty's work is great.
So do
Um,
you like give those as tasks for students to do? Like next time, you have a test coming up. For example, I meet with a student, I know you've got your, midterm AP, or you're just stressed this week. It's the week, all your midterms are going on. So do you give them certain things? I want you to try this or to
yeah,
try that. Um,
I do.
how do you help them get engaged and learn
How do
how
I
to?
plug them in? If they're stressed out, the first thing I do is a strengths inventory. I ask them, where in your life have do you experience stress besides academics? Is there any other area of your life? Are you in school plays? Are you on the lacrosse field? Are you in debate or student council, job interviews? Where is there any area you have to perform? Do you experience stress? Yes or no? Okay. How do you manage that? And I find out what have you already found out over your 15, 16, 17 years that's worked for you? Can we bring that into the academic domain first? And some kids, some lacrosse players go for a run that helps them manage their feet. Okay, so before this next AP exam, I want you to go for a run in the morning. I'll let my camera got a little funky there. There we go. I want you to go for a run. So to help you reset your stress level, because we know it has all these amazing effects neurochemically, and physiologically in the body and the brain. So do that. What else works for you? Taking a bath, playing certain music, doing some cognitive rehearsal, some practice. Can you imagine the desired outcome? Can you walk through it? This thing that's causing you stress, can you close your eyes and imagine it going well? And lay down that track versus just the anxious, nervous failure track. Can you intentionally walk through it in a positive way? And then looking at self-talk and messages. What are you telling yourself? Can you write down like just what are you thinking about? And I'll write it down for them and I'll take notes for what they're thinking, what they're saying. I'll feed it back. There are times I've had kids go on like if they're really nervous about some outcome, and there's like, oh, you're gonna mess this up, you're gonna screw. I actually have them draw a picture of that character saying those things. And I try to make some cognitive distance from those thoughts. It could be the most simple basic line drawing, but you're trying to create distance psychically from this, some separation. And then, oh, that's just Murray the worry thing. That's not me. That is a separate subpersona, some compartment, and that's job is to be negative, critical, anxious. Okay, that's you again, and learning how to separate some from those, and that's a pretty basic cognitive therapy move. And so, looking at the self-talk, one thing, like Ethan Cross, I mentioned his work up in Michigan, is the simplest thing of having you statements. And when someone's nervous, anxious, I'm not going to be adequate up for this thing, you shift from I can do it to you've got this. Carmen, you've got this. You're going to nail it. You are ready for this thing. You've prepared. You can do this. Go slow, take a breath. You've got this. And so shifting to that third part, that different voicing is actually more relaxing than an I statement. Simple little thing. And there's, doing research labs, doing little cortisol swabs, putting people on MRI scans of what's active. And they find that, yeah, that's a basic little thing. Being mindful of self-talk. I love Sean Baylock. She's now the president of Dartmouth. But for a long time at Chicago, she was doing research on anxiety, and she wrote a book called Choke. That was pretty helpful, pretty good. And Sean Baylock's part of her research was it's taking 10 minutes. Her and her colleague Ramirez, they were doing some work on journaling and affective, emotional writing for 10 minutes about your anxieties is actually critically important to help you downregulate anxiety. So, because we get caught up in our thoughts and we can just go in circles forever. When you stop and write it down, that has an effect of that helps calm the circular exit rumination, kind of brings it down. So there is something very powerful and positive of doing writing about, I'm nervous about this, my stomach's off, I'm afraid of this. Putting it in writing is helpful. And it can also be talking to a friend who's supportive, empathic, or a therapist. But doing some journaling costs nothing, and pen and a piece of paper. Versus reaching out to peers who are less skilled. It's one thing if teenagers trying to help each other versus ideally if you have real issues, someone who's really expert can be helpful. If they have good rapport with their parents can help kids if they have that kind of connection in there, that trust that's been built. Sometimes peers can amp up anxiety if they're not skilled, depending upon if they say things that, oh man, now I'm really worked up. And girls more so than the guys. There's some research on that. The girls can get themselves into a co-rumination little thing that gets them worked up even more than regulating. And so then what I don't want is kids going to let me numb this out with a substance. Let me knock this down with alcohol. Let me do something with a pill. Let me cut myself. Let me find a way. Let me create pain here to downgrade this pain here. And that's something that I've had kids do. Substances and self-harm. There's more of that now than there used to be. And so I think students don't have really positive adaptive ways to regulate their anxiety. So they go to ways that stop it, but ways that are more expensive. There's a cost to those. I talk about the havening, very basic stuff. I talk about doing breath work. Anything, all the Eastern technologies, the mindfulness, the breathing, anything with yoga, anything with meditation. I have an app called the Waking Up app. I spend $100 a year on that, and I play I play these things, and I take breaths, like they calm me down. I use those technologies. Breathing, you can't be breathing, in a really slow, measured way and still have super high anxiety. What happens is that the mechanism is something called the vagus nerve. It's the wandering nerve, which goes from your head down to your gut. And when you're doing slow diaphragmatic breathing, you're actually pushing on the vagus nerve. And that slow kind of pulse sends signals to the body to calm things down. So the breathing itself hits the vagus nerve, but slow diaphragmatic breathing, and then that lowers respiration, that lowers the pulse, the heart slows down, that lowers the blood pressure. So when you start doing slow diaphragmatic breathing, the body, that's a signal to calm down. And Sean Baylock talks about also the physiological, how like getting tense, and like there's certain postures which enforce and accelerate anxiety, and certain opening the hands, those actually tell the body to relax. And that was something from William James 100 years ago, one of the first American psychologists, says there was a quote. It's not you're running from the bear because you're scared. It's because no, it's not you're scared you're running from the bear. It's because you're running that's amplifying your fear. It's like certain physical things, postures affect emotional states. So like there's tons of work. Danny Kahneman and Amos Tversky, their work, Fast and Slow. There are certain things where our body crosses over to our emotions, like clenching our teeth or our fists starts affecting our emotional response. And our outer world changes our inner world. And the same as our inner world, there's a back and forth from the body and the mind. And so if our body's all tense and stressed, then that affects our inner world versus if we're open and relaxed, it affects our inner states. And the same thing, if our thoughts get really wound up, then our bodies start getting tensed up. So you can approach it from the body angle, and that's part of the calming, or you can approach it from the self-talk. So you can either, there are ways in through the mind, there are ways in through the body, like tensing and releasing muscles, relaxation, yoga. There are lots of ways to bring down arousal. And this is going to be a lifelong project. And there's so many folks who reach for a cocktail at night or 2 glasses of wine, like whatever it is to calm themselves down. And that works. But again, then there are costs. And then part of it is, can I find a way to bring myself down without needing something external that may have some costs, some harm? But learning how to downregulate arousal is a lifelong project. So, but if kids can learn good skills now, that can carry them through high school, through college, into their early 20s, when they have small kids and they're not sleeping. What are ways that you're going to do of managing stress and arousal, work stress, money stress, physical stress? We have to do this through our entire lives. So I think it's talking to your kids about what works for you, having a conversation about what do you do to chill out. Some kids, I play a video game and numb out. Some kids, I play music. Some kids, I go for a run and then I take a hot bath. I do whatever. I play with the dog. Like I garden. I pull things out with my hands. Like whatever it is, there's no wrong answer. It's just, learning how to take care of yourself and teaching our kids that. We want kids who are successful in life. If they can learn self-regulation skills, that's going to make their lives better. It's going to make their partnerships better. It's going to make their work life better. So to me, this is really big stuff. And it goes way beyond getting a certain GPA or certain test score, at this phase of life.
And I think that is the key. And that's where we come from as counselors and advisors is, helping to teach students life skills.
Yeah.
And in either inadvertently or advertently helping to teach parents those too, because the parents need them just as much as, and even grandparents. I mean, I'm seeing that as a grandparent too. I'm seeing this in my grandchildren. So being able to use these things and create that balance in whatever way we can is so key. So it looks like, Carmen, do you have a question, something that you want to ask?
Yes, so there's two. So, Jed, can you clarify for the Waking Up app, are you using that for breathing exercises? Are there other tools that you have used for that?
So in terms of the Waking Up app, I do the basic. I love Sam Harris. I also pay money for his other app where he Making Sense. But for the Waking Up app, I do these daily meditations. And there are times I play. So it's honestly, it's a 10-minute meditation. And I press play. He talks very slowly. I could never in my life talk as slowly as he talks. But his voice is, it's very grounding, very soothing. And it's not specific breath work, the ones I've played. Maybe there are all these different lines of different podcast sequences. I just mostly do Sam Harris. But I think if you're learning how to practice mindful breathing, like with the 4 count in, hold, and 4 out, you could probably Google 4 count breathing exercises. There's also, let me throw one thing out, which I have done and I like, and I have kids who've done it. It's called tapping. Very simple. And all it is, it's again using touch, but also it's trying to access the meridian system of, of Eastern medicine, where it's like you're tapping 7 times on the eyebrow and the outside. It's the simplest thing. And whenever I do it, I find the side of the mouth. It's somehow the collarbone. It always calms me down and the top of the head. And there's something like this repetitive kind of like whether these are pressure points, and then like you kind of tap the in the palm. So it's called the emotional freedom technique / tapping. You can Google it, pop it up there. It's totally free and it takes nothing. And I have friends who do it, who tap, and it helps them relax themselves. So Havening, Havening, simple, free, just it's like calming, tapping, breathing, for the 4 count breathing where you hold, any kind of mindfulness meditation where you're learning how to observe your emotional state. And and so this stuff, you're gonna find what works. And my thing is, I give a grab bag of techniques because what works for me might not work for you. And all that matters is you find things that work for you. Like right now, like there are things at my desk, I have little crystals, which are, and I like crystals. I like certain things that my wife thinks are crazy. She's a lawyer. I'm a little bit more, I don't know. I spent a year in New Mexico and that probably had an effect on me. But in the grand scheme, like sometimes holding a crystal, holding a little piece of lapis, it's a rock, but or certain things help calm me down. Like before, when I would give big talks or lectures, I would like have something in my pocket, like a little thing I would hold on to, and that would help me self-regulate. So something as simple as a rock, people have worry stones or rosary beads. Some of these technologies are really old, and like religion has been exploring ways of self-regulating forever, for thousands of years. And the breath work, that's all prana, that's all from India. And then it went over to China and came back to us. But it's just, the idea of the breathing, the prana, the atman, like it's the breath is the grounding thing. And learning how to use the breath. And some people, they'll use the breath, that works for them. Other people, they're going to tape little messages to their computer or on their whatever it is. They'll have little reminders. And so if I give a kid 20 things and they find two that work, awesome. And some kids, you're the runner. You're gonna go run. Some kids will hit a punching bag. Like whatever, you're the hot bath person. Some people use essential oils or scents, and their olfactory senses are really highly sensitive. And so for them, a certain smell calms them down. Like perfect. I was involved with this therapeutic group called STAR. I told you I went there when I was 25. I became the president of STAR for like 4 years, and I was a therapist there for a bunch of years. But there was one woman who the smell of vanilla always brought her to a calm center place. And she realized later through some therapy, oh, that was my mom making cookies in my childhood. And that scent used to fill the house. And that scent, the olfactory, bam, to the memory, like it was totally subconscious, subcortical. But it was that brought her the energy of mom and that sense of comfort and calming. So for her, getting a little hint of vanilla could bring her back to calm. Like, dude, use whatever works. There's no right or wrong. And it's so specific to your experience, your early experiences, your body, the way you're wired, your brain, how you're wired up. It could be a sound calms you down. It could be a touch. It could be the way your body is built will help tell you how to calm yourself down. Temple Grandin, her stuff, she's amazing. Researcher at autism. She found like physical pressure on her body helped calm her down when she was totally worked up. And she built a thing to help put pressure on her body and helped her calm herself down. And like people have worry blankets or whatever, like there's no right or wrong. It's just learning how to listen to yourself. And the same thing academically with kids, like learning how to, with executive functioning, like whatever you need to help get things done, do it. And whatever works for your sister, doesn't matter, your parents, doesn't matter, what works for you. And let's experiment until we find what works for you. Wow. And so that to me is like the ultimate big message of how to manage arousal and anxiety. Yeah.
Wow. Well, you have packed so much into this, Jed. I'm seeing comments and everybody is just really appreciate. I really appreciate Julian's comment, best talk ever.
Oh, thank you. Oh, that's great.
So one thing I wanted to ask, so as we close, like, is there one source, like a elementary first step, of all these different research and sources you've mentioned today? Where would I start? Where would you recommend somebody start? Like, what would be the first place you would recommend they go to get a start on all of this?
Early, and the book I was thinking about for Siegel, like Mind Sight, is a book I read, God, it's been over a decade, but that's a very basic introduction, like a primer. I'm a fan of that book. It's been years, but I remember his stuff is really powerful. I think maybe the Chatter, maybe Ethan Kross. Easy book, accessible. You buy it on Amazon, it's there 2 days. That to me, like learning how to manage your self-talk is a very like that book to me pays dividends. And I think there isn't a person in the world who can't, attend somewhat to their self-talk and learn from themselves, learning about how their brain works, learning about the things that turn up anxiety, the things that upregulate anxiety, the things that downregulate anxiety. That to me is a very simple little book. My mom has clinical anxiety, and she said like this book, she's read it several times. I gave it to her and she's like, she kept the book. I'm like, I'll buy my own copy. It's all good. But I know like from, giving that book to someone, that book I know landed. And so from experience. So I think those are some very basic, you might want to just, go and download, like, I think you can do a free trial of the Waking Up app if you want to try it. And there are a bunch of different apps of meditation and mindfulness. And then beyond that, I think so much is just talking to your kids openly about how you manage your stress, how stress manifests for you, the way it shows up and how it shows up, and then how you regulate it, and things you've tried over the course of your life. And maybe the less adaptive in my 20s, I tried this, that was a mistake, but now I do this, and that's helped me. And your kids can learn from your journey, and it's a way to connect with them talking about because we all experience stress and it's part of being alive. But learning how to keep it so it stays, adaptive and healthy and doesn't become unhealthy.
Mhm, mhm. Well, and I think that's the key thing because sometimes we feel like, oh no, you can't have stress. It's not the stress itself, but it's whether it's adaptive or maladaptive. And
Yeah,
so,
that's right.
that's a key thing. Well, Jed, thank you so much. This is the hour I knew this would happen. The hour's just flown by, and we will be making this available to everybody. And thank you again for your time.
My pleasure.
And thanks for everybody being here. We're going to be here. The topic from today ties really in well with next week's topic. I'm going to have Christine Bowman, Lauren Sefton, and Kathy Finks. So Christine's from Southwestern, Lauren's from Rhodes, Kathy's from the College of Worcester, and we're going to talk about transition. And, students are going from high school to college. That is a huge transition in their lives. And how can we on our side of the desk as counselors help students navigate that successfully? And what are the colleges doing on their side? Because it all ties to everything we talked about today. They're seeing that increase in anxiety, seeing increase in student health challenges, the increase in numbers of students accessing mental health on campus. So knowing and understanding that, it all just goes together. And I want to reiterate something you said at the very beginning. And this is what my role is as a UCLA instructor. People get into this thinking, I'm going to help kids do applications. I'm going to help them explore their journey and, go to college, find a career and major. And that's all good. But we are so much more. With the work we do is as a counselor, that's kind of the secondary aspect of it. So learning the tools and things that we can be effective counselors is what we're all about. So thank you very much. Everybody, thank you for being here. Be here next week and we'll talk about transition. And August is going to be back to school month. So I'm going to have a Friday forum every Friday in August. I've got a dynamite lineup. Watch your emails. I'll have things on that. I have some workshops that I'm putting together. Those are going to probably start the end of July and also be available in August. So lots of great things coming up that I'm working on. So everybody have a great weekend. Jed, have a great weekend.
You too.
Carmen, thank you so much.
Bye, thank you.
And we will see everybody again in a week.